So, welcome or welcome back to Positivity Bias. Positivity bias means the Jewish perspective of seeing the positive and even seeing the opportunity in every situation. Tonight, within that, we talk about the power of perspective, the power of the impact of us seeing the positive in every situation. It sounds like, at first glance, that it's just a matter of how we see it and a matter of attitude, but we're going to see how powerful that can really be. In other words, can the way we look at something really help? Well, I'm going to argue that it can help quite a bit. Of course, it doesn't work without a good Jewish mother joke. And the Jewish mother sends a gift to her son for Hanukkah. And that gift is a package with two wonderful sweaters inside. And the nice young man is so thoughtful that he shows up at the Hanukkah party at his mom's house wearing one of those sweaters. Well, that all ended when mom sees him and said, "What's going on? You didn't like the other sweater?" So, of course, she ruined it for herself by taking a negative attitude to what's going on. Instead of appreciating, instead of seeing and enjoying and appreciating how her gift was appreciated, she's taking a negative attitude and putting a negative spin, and that's ruining her own experience. Of course, not every situation is that simple, but in a broader sense, what this tells us is that we're always going to have a bias. There's always going to be some subjectivity to the way we look at things. There's nothing we can do about that. We can't help that. But what we can help is what kind of bias we have. So Charles Roth, he was the editor of the National Jewish Post for decades, I believe. And he once told the Lubavitcher Rebbe that our paper is independent and totally objective. And the Rebbe said, perhaps it's independent, but nobody can ever be totally objective, because we always have some kind of subjectivity built into ourselves. Even if we try and we give it our best try, we can never truly see something in its absolute objective form. We always see things from our attitudes, from the lens of our perspective, from our outlook on life, the things that we bring along from our own experiences, from our own nature, from our own tendency, and really whatever is inside of us. So whatever's going around us, whatever we experience, whatever we encounter, we're always, by default, viewing that through a subjective lens. So, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Having that bias or having a subjectivity is not always a problem. Sometimes it could be. The Torah tells us that a biased judge, a judge who has been bribed in any way, and the way the Torah defines that is a lot more strict than in common systems of law, any type of benefit that a judge could have possibly derived would disqualify him because he would no longer be objective. The Torah also establishes that relatives, family members, will automatically be disqualified from being one's judge or saying testimony on one's behalf, because again, they are automatically considered subjective and disqualified to testify. Now, does that mean that this is something wrong? Is it a bad thing that relatives are biased? Obviously not. It might be bad for a judge to have favoritism, but a parent should love their children, and a sibling should love his siblings, and every individual should love his or her spouse or partner. So the question is not whether we're biased. As we go through life, we're automatically subjective. The question is, what is our bias? How do we choose to see things? What subjectivity do we apply to the things that go on around us in life? And to illustrate this, there's a really beautiful story of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe penned his own memoirs, giving us a lot of insight into his childhood and his upbringing by his own father, who was the Lubavitcher Rebbe before him. And in those in memoirs, he describes an incident where he asked his father, "Why is it that we have two eyes?" So he's 4 years old, young future Rebbe, asking his father, "Why did God create us with two eyes? Wouldn't one eye be sufficient? Couldn't we be created differently? Why two?" So the father reminded him something that he had been learning. He had been learning the alphabet, the Aleph Beis, the Hebrew alphabet. And I'll try to show that on the screen to illustrate the point that he made. And the father tells the son that, don't you have the shin and the sin? So these are among the last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the shin making that kind of SH sound, and the sin more of a regular S sound. So what's the difference? The father, the fifth Rebbe, asks his son, who would grow up to be the sixth and previous Rebbe, what's the difference between the shin and the sin? The difference is whether that dot is on the right side or the left side. The difference, in other words, is right side versus left side, a right perspective versus a left perspective. And that, he explained, is the reason why we have two eyes, because we have a right eye and a left eye. And we always have the choice whether we're going to look at something with the right eye or look at something with the left eye. And there are some things that a left eye might be a good idea for. But for the most part, we should be training ourselves to see things in their positive side, to see things with the right eye, and to see what kind of positive and what kind of goodness we can find in every situation. And really, what we choose to see determines our experience of that phenomena, of that situation. The situation might remain the same. The incident or the phenomenon or the interaction might remain the same. But the way we choose to look at it determines how we will experience it and what that will mean to us in our lives. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, sharpened this point and really explained this quite pointedly in a letter where he points out the two extremes that exist in this. Let's see that again right here. So this is a letter written by Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1960. And I'll read that out because it's quite powerful on this point. In our world, everything's a mixture of good and bad. Human beings must choose which aspects they will emphasize, contemplate, and pursue. How instructive is that which our sages tell us, that Adam, meaning the first human who God created in the Garden of Eden, was an ingrate. Even before he was banished from the Garden of Eden while living in a literal paradise, he complained about his circumstances. So living in paradise, quite literally, Adam is complaining that something is not the way he wanted it to be. On the other hand, there were Jewish men and women who thanked and blessed the Creator and recited the morning blessings while living through the most horrifying times in the German concentration camps. Ultimately, everyone's circumstances will be somewhere between these two extremes. My point in saying this is not to admonish you, the recipient of the letter. It is simply to underscore the reality. The type of lives that we live, whether full of satisfaction and meaning or the opposite, depends in large measure on our willpower, which dictates whether we will focus on the positive or on the negative. So we choose whether we see the positive or the negative. And that choice determines our actual experience. One can be in paradise, in the Garden of Eden, and see the negative, which you'll inevitably be able to find, and be disappointed. And one can be, hopefully nobody should ever be, in a concentration camp and still look for the positive connection to God. Of course, the rest of us are somewhere in between. Our lives might not be paradise, but it's not quite nearly as bad as what these are grandparents experienced in the previous generation. And we have to make the choice. Are we going to see the good? Are we going to look at the good? And will that be our experience? Or will our experience be the negative and the less than perfect and the not so good? And to illustrate this and show how the one scenario, where an unchanged scenario, the same story is happening, and the two people are viewing that same story, and each of them views it in his own way. Each of them views that differently. Let's see that in this little video clip. What just happened? The story only happened once. There's only one individual who showed up at the synagogue and read the newspaper throughout the whole prayer. But two different people viewed that very differently. The traveler was disappointed, disturbed, and pained to see this individual totally disregard the prayer. But the Rebbe was inspired. The Rebbe was excited. The Rebbe said, wow, look at the Jewish soul in action. Even though he knows nothing of prayer, he has no appreciation for the prayer. He's busy with his newspaper. He nevertheless chooses to show up at the synagogue to be the 10th individual to complete the minyan so everybody else can pray properly. He nevertheless chooses to have that connection and to make that contribution to the Jewish life. So see that connection, see that life, see that spark of the neshama, of the soul that's in him. So the Rebbe had a positive and uplifting, inspiring experience from this story, while the traveler had a disappointing one. And the difference was really only a difference of perspective, a difference of how to look at that. And that is our choice throughout life, even in challenging situations. What are we going to do? How will we choose to view it? Now, that's not always easy, granted. We need to train ourselves to see that positive. It doesn't just happen on its own. And that's especially because we have what researchers call a negativity bias. Why do politicians love smear campaigns and negative advertising? Because it works. It's much more powerful. That's because people react to negative news a lot stronger than to positive news. And probably the reason for this is that we're naturally, instinctively, we're kind of hardwired to defend ourselves. And when we hear something that's a problem, that's not good, that's negative in some way, our system jumps up to the defense, to protect ourselves from it, to push it away, to react to it. So there's a lot of energy inside of us hearing all that negative and responding to it. When it comes to the positive, we just take it in. So consequently, people hear the negative in life and in the news that they hear and in the interactions, people naturally hear that a lot stronger. It's a lot more powerful. It sticks a lot more. If you think about it, if somebody had something negative happen during the day, they tend to call the day a bad day, even if so much other things, there was so much other activity in the day and so many other interactions, which are probably mostly okay, but the negative one is the one that tends to stick out. The negative one is the one that we naturally react to more. And our job as human beings and as Jewish, from a Jewish perspective, is to change that. Our job is to quote a very core Hasidic teaching, is not to let our feelings and our natural instincts and our natural response rule us, but we should rule our feelings and we should be in charge and we should decide if we want to react negatively or positively to whatever it is. Explaining this idea, another slide might be helpful. And that's where we see just a couple of words. What you have up here is kelev. Kelev is the Hebrew word for a dog. Might be any kind of dog, might be someone's favorite pet. Kelev. But kelev spells out, if you break it down, kulei lev. So it's a shortened version of kulei lev. He's all heart. Some animals, maybe dogs in particular, are known to be all hearts. People find them very loving. People find a connection to them. Those who are pet owners, they have that, that appreciation. But it's also the downside of an animal versus a human being. An animal can be kulei lev, all heart, all instinct, all feeling, not much intellect, managing and directing all of that heart and feeling, all of that instinct. It's just whatever the feeling is, whatever the emotion is, whatever the instinct is, it reacts to it, can't control it. A human is not supposed to be kulei lev, all heart. A human is supposed to use the intellect that we were granted by God to control the heart, to manage and to direct our instincts and our attitudes and even our natural tendencies, and to upgrade them and improve them and enhance them. So it's true that we have a natural tendency to hear the negative, and that gets to us quite kind of strongly. And we hear it amplified in our minds and amplified inside of us, and something terrible happened and it sounds so much worse than it is. And when something positive happens or there's something good within the negative, we don't see it as much. But our job is to train ourselves, to kind of rewire ourselves to see that positive, to see the good and the opportunity and the better side that's in it. And that gives us a whole different experience of the reality. So if the wonderful Jewish mother would have smiled and appreciated her son's gesture by showing up in the sweater she bought him, she could have enjoyed the party. Instead, she chose to complain. She chose to apply a negative perspective, and that ruined it for her. Of course, on a much more complex and broader level, we have the choice today to take a positive attitude, to look and see whatever positive and goodness we could find, and that should be our experience, or that our primary experience should be the trouble and the challenge and the negative, which unfortunately there's plenty to go around. We don't need to look too far to find it. So we're going to work on this together in the coming weeks as we continue on the topic of having a positive bias as opposed to a negative bias. As we continue our series of positivity bias, we're going to look for some Jewish tips and how to train ourselves to have that positive attitude and have that upgraded experience. But before we close this one, I'd like to show another video clip where you see the Rebbe taking a negative situation, turning that around to something incredibly positive, and with the most unlikely of characters and in the most unlikely of settings. So let's have a look.
Dr. David Lukens is chair of the political science department at Touro College. For 20 years, he served on the staff of U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
My two best stories with the Rebbe in public policy, and I used them in class. The first one I used in class in American politics as an example. There was a woman in Brooklyn, college teacher, angry black woman named Shirley Chisholm. She got elected to the United States Congress in the mid-60s. She was a fiery speaker. She was considered a black power advocate. Whites were scared silly of her. And she was the first black woman ever elected to the United States Congress, and she was a bomb thrower. So the white Southern racists that ran the U.S. House of Representatives from the South said, we'll teach this blank a lesson. And they assigned her to the Agriculture Committee of the House of Representatives. It was a great gelächter. It was a great joke. I still remember the New York Times front page article said, does a tree grow in Brooklyn, ? They said, the chairman, they've appointed Shirley Chisholm, not to housing, which she requested, not to a committee on poverty, but the Agriculture Committee. And when she retired from the House, I was there when she told the following story. She said she was very depressed and very upset and didn't know what to do. She got a phone call. The Lubavitcher Rebbe wants to see you. And of course, she was the congresswoman from Crown Heights. She had helped win the election, the primary, with the strong support of Lubavitch. She had some very close relationship with people in the Crown Heights community, and she came to see the Rebbe. As she told the story, she had seen him once before when he had refused to endorse her. But then she said, everyone voted for me, so I guess he did something. She was very cute about that. She said, but then she came to see him the second time, and he sat down and he said, I know you're very upset. She says, I am upset. I'm insulted. What should I do? And he said, what a blessing God's given you. This country has so much surplus food, and there's so many hungry people, and you can use this gift that God's given you to feed hungry people. Find a creative way to do it. And she says, the first day she came to Washington, she met a young congressman who's now a world-famous figure, Robert Dole, from Kansas. And they started talking, and he said, our farmers have all this extra food. We don't know what to do with it. She said, 1 second, the rabbi. And what we call WIC and food stamps, largely expanded. There was a tiny pilot program before. The whole existing food stamps program came out of the Agriculture Committee of the United States Congress, and Shirley Chisholm said, in front of everyone there in Washington, she said, I owe this because a rabbi who was an optimist taught me optimism, taught me that what God gives, what you may think is a challenge is a gift from God. She said, if poor children, babies, I heard her say this, she said, poor babies have milk, if poor children have food, it's because this rabbi in Crown Heights had vision.
So obviously that's a rather dramatic example of seeing the positive and using that not only to see things more positively, but to react differently and turn a situation around. On Thursday, we're going to have the other class, the cultivating character, life wisdom from the Talmud. Please join us then, same time, same Zoom link. And then, of course, Monday, we're going to continue with this series, The Positivity Bias, where we'll be talking more about how we actually develop this perspective and see things as positive as we can. Before we conclude, if anybody has any questions, I'd love to hear. Well, then I guess everyone's lost in thought. Maybe I didn't make enough sense to ask questions. There's a written question here. It says, thank you. Okay. So we'll be closing up for now. I hope to see you all Thursday. And then again on Monday. Have a wonderful week, and let's all make the best of whatever we can.
Thank you, Rebbe. It was very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good night.
Night.
Thank you.